Welcome to the Catbird Quilts. I'm Kathy Martin. Today's video is the story of a quilt that's nearly 2 years in the making. And so I have a lot to say about it. Stay with me. So the quilt that I want to tell you about today is the EyeletLace quilt by Kindred Quilt Company. We're going to go on and put a picture of it up right away because once you see this quilt, it doesn't look like it at all. So the original picture and my quilt are very far apart, and boy, is that part of the story. The first week of November 2022, I had been looking at the EyeletLace quilt by Christina from Kindred Quilt Company, and I loved it, and I thought it was so pretty, and I thought it might be great for shirts. And so I'm like, well, let me just do a practice block, and I did. So from that very first block, I was hooked. It was a solid red men's shirt and a red gingham shirt, and then the center was a little small gray gingham, and I loved it. I made one block and was in. Prior to that, I had gotten the pattern and I got the coloring sheet. Now, this quilt pattern is Christina's very first quilt pattern she ever did. So it's actually many pages, but at the very end was a coloring page. And I had this idea, what if I made a Christmas quilt in this quilt pattern? I had a lot of red gingham. I had a lot of light blue gingham. Still have a lot of dark green gingham. And I was like, those are great Christmas colors. That really dark Christmas red, that forest green, and a light blue. It's one of my favorite combinations for Christmas for colors. Love the quilt coloring page, by the way. If you are a quilt designer and you're listening to this video or watching this video, please include the coloring page. It's the best. So I did this kind of off-label design within the coloring page, but I really liked it. And I was like, okay, well, let's do it. So of course, then I made the red practice block and I loved it. And then I made the green practice block, and then I was committed. So let me spread it out and show it to you. And you can keep in mind what that original quilt design looked like. And here we go. So here it is. I originally went into this quilt believing that I could have it done by Christmas. I started the first block the first week of November. And I had forgotten that number one tenet about quilting, which is, let's say it together, quilting is slow. Also, number two tenet, which nobody talks about, life goes on even once you've planned a quilt and have a deadline, whether it's self-imposed or external imposed, life is still happening. So in that month and a half or 2 months, I found out I had a melanoma in my arm and had that removed. I got COVID. I was working at a pharmacy that's an hour and some change away, and the pharmacy pipes froze and burst and flooded, and every other thing under the sun. I got to Christmas time, and needless to say, the quilt was nowhere close to being done. I really wasn't even dismayed, and at that point had started realizing, oh gosh, quilting is slow. So I made the blocks and continued to make them. And because I liked the way it was coming together, even though it was kind of a different vision than the original quilt designer probably had, mine has kind of a stripe in it. So it's red blocks and then blue blocks and then a row of green and then back to a row of blue and then ending with the red. So it's kind of starting with red and ending with red, and with the green ribbon of the EyeletLace running through the middle. And I kind of pushed through into January and was just still kind of making progress, thinking, well, I mean, it's a month past Christmas, but it's okay. And then it was like, well, it's February and got to February and literally lost all steam for it. Even though I was loving how it was coming together, part of it was I challenged myself with this quilt top. I wanted to use all shirts or all thrifted fabric. And I did beautifully with the colored parts. So the blues and the, light blue gingham and the dark green gingham. But whites, even though there are a bazillion white men's shirts out there, this is a lot of background fabric, a lot. It's not a difficult pattern. It's actually a really great pattern. We actually did a video about that. It's a great quilt pattern. By the way, if you're interested in quilt patterns for shirts and thrifted fabrics, we do a whole video series called Great Quilt Patterns, and there's a playlist for it. So you click on the playlist tab and you can see all of those quilt patterns that I have deemed great for working with shirts. And this is one of them. So I was just kind of trucking along, but there's a lot of in between the big blocks. And lost all steam for it, as I have said. I probably will say that again because it's a 2-year process. And so I put it away because plenty of time until Christmas. And lots of things happened in life, none of which I'm going to spend any time on. And then it got to July of last year, and I did a Christmas in July video and got the bug again. And so I picked it back up and committed myself to finishing it. And I did. It's sewn on point. So, there are all these kind of partial blocks all along the edge. And because I'm me, and because my coloring page, I didn't even really follow the coloring page, I had to figure out how to do the edges. And it's on the bias, which can sometimes add a little bit of challenge. And I had to figure out how I wanted to do it. And that had stymied me for a while, but I kind of buckled down, pushed on through, and got the quilt top done. And it kind of languished there. I was like, yay, the quilt top is done, Christmas in July, and then did nothing with it. I had been choosing the back fabric, the fabrics for the backing, based on a shirt that I had picked up from the thrift store. So I'm going to turn that over, and we're going to talk about the back for a brief moment. So here's the back. Obviously, we had not arrived at this point in the story, but I have to turn it over to tell you how I got here. So this red plaid, this Christmas tartan, that's what I'm going to call it. It is a tartan. I'm not sure it's called Christmas, but I had that in my stash. This was a shirt, this fabric over here. Paul has made many a remark on how it looks like 70s Christmas wrapping paper to him. And so, of course, once I figured out this is a Christmas quilt for real, I'm going to put that on the back. And then I was in the thrift store this was when life was happening with arm surgery and COVID and pharmacies flooding and everything else. And I don't know if you can see it or not. We'll see if we can give you a close-up. This was a men's shirt. It is navy and has little rotund Santas all over it. He's holding a bell with his bag over his back. And when I saw this in the thrift store, I laughed out loud. I just laughed. I'm like, I have to buy this shirt and I have to use this on the Christmas quilt. So I had the shirt not broken down, had that shirt broken down and in pieces. And then in this same trip to the thrift store, I found this green, I think it's called Swiss Dot. I think that's the type of fabric that this is. It's actually exceedingly thin, but it looked kind of Christmassy to me because it's just that interesting green. And I thought, well, maybe I'll be able to make that work. So now we've now reversed, and now we're fast forwarding back to July of last year. So I decided, how fun would it be if I did Christmas presents on the back? And I'll do one for each type of fabric because of the whole joke about the 70s Christmas wrapping paper. So I made this one, made that one, made this one, fussed and cussed and didn't use enough spray starch and cutting it was a mess, but got it done. I should have interfaced it, which, by the way, if you have a thin, really thin fabric, you can really do a lot with starch, but sometimes they're so thin that they just benefit from interfacing. This would have been one of them, but I was hard-headed and didn't. So learn from my mistakes. And then we had this kind of unknown, like imagine a big question mark where where that other present is. And we laugh because I actually love this plaid. So this was like my Christmas present. Paul actually liked the green. So even though he teased about this one, this kind of was his block. And then our elder daughter and I thought this was really funny. And so we decided that either these could go Paul or our older daughter. And then our younger daughter essentially had no Christmas present. And she's my fabric shopper. So she's the one this is also the colorist. So she'll go with me to the fabric store. And black is her favorite color. I mean, we looked at every possible Christmas fabric. We hated all of them. I looked at the thrift store, could not find anything. Eventually, we ended up at Hobby Lobby, just looking through fabric just randomly and stumbled on that one. And even though it's really confetti. I'm looking at it. Sorry, it's kind of interesting to me. It really is like confetti, but to me, it had that Christmas lights look about it. And she loved it instantly. And huzzah, we now had our 4 presents representing our 4 family members. And I did not grow up with a mom that made quilts. She made all kinds of other things. And my grandmothers both did all sorts of everything, embroidery, quilting, cross-stitching, but nobody made holiday quilts or Christmas quilts or really any holiday quilt. And so somewhere along the way, I was like, our family's going to have a Christmas quilt. And I really, like when I would talk about it, I would use that voice and everything. And so having the 4 presents on the back that kind of represented the 4 family members was really fun and exciting and kind of got me back in the spirit. And then it was, well, now how do I put this on the backing? I had the presents. What do you do now? So I picked gray because I like gray a lot. And what I did, I actually have a swath of fabrics that is all of the Moda Bella solids. There's a friend of a friend, Barbara, and she's local, and she had ordered, I did not know this, you can order a sample of all of the solids. So it's just a, swath of fabric with little circles of every color and their name. So I knew we had a lot going on with our Christmas presents. This whole quilt has a lot going on and did from the very beginning. And so I just thought, well, I'll match the gray of the little cornerstones. And that's what I did as close as I could. And then did the math to try to get it centered on the back of the quilt. And it was some wrangling. I did some fabric wrangling and got it put together and was pretty pleased. And in the meantime, had found a new long arm quilter, Laura, of Crafty Quilting Designs, and she had reached out to me. I had initially talked to her and she messaged me and was like, hey, if you send this to me, I can probably have it done for you by Christmas time. I was so thankful for that. Like, it was done. The top was done. The back was done. I don't know what it was. I just couldn't bring myself to figure out what to do next. Either to try to quilt it myself, which it's very large. It's large. It's 80 by 80, I think. Maybe 88 by 88 inches. It's big. Talk about wrangling fabric. It would have really been a challenge to quilt myself. At that point, I had lost all steam for it again. The whole quilt story was like, it's like this. Oh, this is so exciting. Oh my gosh, I don't think I could. Oh, no. I've got just over the course of 2020, the end of 2022, all into 2023. And so now I had the backing together, had the top done, and just, it's like I couldn't face it. And I know that sounds so silly, but it's like I just couldn't face it. I could not move forward with it. And because Laura and I had some Instagram messaging and I had said, oh, I've got this quilt that's coming, she just kind of picked up the ball, and thank God she did. And so I was like, oh, yes, that would be so great. So we messaged back and forth, obviously sent it to her. I told her that I wanted something, obviously, that was Christmassy, but not too over the top. I don't know if it was her or me that suggested Christmas lights, but we decided on Christmas lights. So it's these old school, like the big bulb Christmas lights, which I still love. And we talked about it, and I told her I wanted like just kind of not too dense quilting, but not too open quilting. So Paul really likes the quilting part. I really like the piecing part. He really likes the quilting part. I'm a less is more when it comes to quilting, and he's a more is more when it comes to the quilting. And so, as usual, I was trying to find just right in between them because we're going to use it as our Christmas quilt as a family. And so Laura, thankfully, understood the assignment and did a perfect mix of these big light bulbs. There's some small ones. There's the cord that runs all in and is like super windy and curvy and kind of gives it some interest. She chose, actually, I guess I chose with her assistance, a slightly darker gray than the background fabric. And the front has that same darker gray as well. So it stands out against that white background, but it's not so in your face that it loses the overall piecing part, which is of course my favorite. And again, as usual, I'm just a challenge for long arm quilters. I feel like my quilts need to come with a warning. Warning, this quilter has put a complicated backing on this that you now must center and square up with the front of the quilt. You think I would learn. You think I would have learned. And I've done it to myself. I don't know. I just have this vision for the way the back is going to look. And it doesn't occur to me that it might be really challenging to do that on a long arm machine. She understood the assignment like 3 different ways for this quilt. She nailed the thread color and the quilting density. And then the piece de resistance was she managed to not only square the back with the front, but also center it exactly the way I had it centered. The 4 presents are literally exactly centered and squared in the back of the quilt, which is no small feat. And for her, I'm very grateful. So if you're a long arm out there and you're eye rolling, I know I'm getting better. Slow. I'm getting better. I'm getting better. But anyway, so got the quilt back on December the 18th of 2023. And I was just ecstatic over it. And in the meantime, somewhere in that year, I don't even remember when, it's a blur, I found a red and white striped men's shirt at the thrift store. And I was like, this is my binding. Because to me, it looked just exactly like a candy cane. And so I cut the shirt apart, made the binding, which I know there are people out there that just adore a striped binding. And I actually love it on other people's quilts. I love it on this quilt. But making striped binding, boo. I'm not a fan at all and will avoid it greatly if I can help it. And it turns out that this particular fabric was a very, very tight weave and very high thread count. Making the binding was a challenge to begin with because I wanted the stripe to match up. If I had to do it again, by the way, I think I would eschew the matching up. I think that would be a no-go for me. I think it would just have to have places where it wasn't exactly matched up. That probably would help my feelings about making stripe binding. But I made the stripe binding, had more than enough. And let me stop actually and show you what that looks like together with the quilt front. So striped binding all the way around, and I felt like it was just perfectly matched with this red on the front. And then, of course, Christmas presents and candy canes are a match made in heaven. And it looked lovely to me up against the gray. It works with the white, I think, and I felt like it really worked with the gray. It took me hours and hours and hours and hours because I like to do hand stitching for the binding. Really, it was just such a high quality shirt that it had such a high thread count and woven so tightly. So let that be quick tip. If you, like me, are buying shirts at the thrift store and using them in your quilting, they do make fantastic binding. But if you have one that is so smooth and so fine and lots of threads, they are not enjoyable to hand stitch. Beautiful, but not easy. So you might consider doing machine binding for that or opt for a different shirt for your binding. Anyway, lessons learned. So got the whole thing finished. I did put a label on it, which every step I get I have a little hesitation. I think I didn't get the label on it until after Christmas, but we actually were able to enjoy the quilt at Christmas time. But by the time I got it all the way completely finished with the label and everything, it was January again. Maybe everybody else is different than me, but by the time January comes, I'm just kind of over Christmas, really. Like, I don't want to talk about Christmas anymore. I don't want to hear Christmas carols anymore. I want the decorations put away. Not that I want to do it. We could have done this video in January of this year. And I just was over it again. Just lost steam for it again. It's the losing steam quilt. And here we are in July. And next week we're going to do a Christmas in July video. And of course, I was like, our Christmas quilt, that we never did a quilt story on it. And so that is how we have arrived nearly 2 years later in July of 2024 with the Christmas quilt on my couch and me waxing nostalgic about the journey that this particular quilt was. But I'm so excited because this year, before Christmas comes, in anticipation of Christmas, we'll be able to get it out, either put it on the bed or on the couch and start getting in that Christmas spirit and not have the, I still haven't finished that Christmas quilt. So let me encourage you, if you have a Christmas project that you started and you have buried it in the bottom of your WIP pile, it is a great time to get it out. You have plenty of time still to finish it, get it quilted and bound, and let this be the Christmas that you get to use it. I'm Kathy Martin. This is the Catbird Quilts. Thank you so much for watching.